Hi everyone, welcome back to Real Talk, our campus weekly video series where we discuss relationships, empathy, advocacy, and life. All of our episodes are pre-recorded and released every Tuesday at 5 p.m. on IGTV and YouTube. So today's episode is one that I think probably a lot of people have conversations with their friends or family or coworkers or whatever about because it's in the news all the time, which is, or the topic is celebrities, people in positions of power who have been accused or convicted or in conversations about, perpetration of sexual or domestic violence or sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, kind of the whole spectrum of those behaviors. And it's funny because I actually literally just had a conversation with some friends about this last week. I don't remember how it came up, but we were talking about the severity of different behaviors of like some celebrities have been accused of like inappropriate comments made, like actors or directors on a set. And then some of the accusations all the way to like actual rape or, sexual violence or domestic violence. Like there's kind of a spectrum of those behaviors. People have responded similarly to those different types of behaviors. And so that was kind of where the conversation started of like, well, we shouldn't treat, my friend was saying, well, we shouldn't treat like Louis C.K. the same way as Harvey Weinstein, or like we shouldn't treat like someone who engaged in like, inappropriate behavior the same as someone who's committed like multiple rapes. And it's like, I understood what he was saying of kind of the like, why are we like the cancel culture? That's actually, I think, how the conversation started of like cancel culture and like, it didn't actually begin with talking about sexual misconduct, but just looking back at like what someone did 20 years ago and holding them accountable now. And it was a really interesting conversation to have, particularly in this time, because where I was kind of coming from and responding was like, yes, there's a difference in, someone celebrity tweeted something inappropriate 10 years ago. Should we cancel them? I don't know. Versus someone like Brett Kavanaugh, who's accused of rape at 16, that was, or 17 years old, however young he was in high school. Like the severity of that versus like an inappropriate tweet, there's a reason that we take it so seriously. It doesn't matter when it happened or how young they were,
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Like, I think there is a difference in the behaviors. I think they're all harmful and they all can, perpetuate rape culture and, kind of victim blaming attitudes and things like that. But I don't think it matters if somebody did that at 17 or 27 or whatever, even if it's 20 years later. I think they should be held accountable for that. And like, I don't know, just thinking about the conversation we'll have today in terms of like celebrities or people in the spotlight in positions of power that have done this, it reminds me of like kind of what we talk about all the time, that like abuse or assault doesn't, oh my God, what is the word? Like it's
like it transcends all.
Yes, like
identities.
it just knows no bounds kind of,
Mm-hmm.
and anyone can be a victim and anyone can be a perpetrator.
Right.
And it just really translates to like, just because these people are in positions of power, like it doesn't mean they're not going to do things in the way that someone who's not in the spotlight might do it.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that the people accusing them are any less valid or any less, facing any less barriers, if not maybe they're facing more when they're trying to report or hold someone accountable for what they've done.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because I don't want to spend too much time on the like response piece because I know we have a lot to get into, but I do want to just like piggyback off of that and just say for all the people out there who are like, they're looking for 10 minutes of fame for reporting sexual violence or domestic violence. Like, let's just clear the air. No one wants to be famous for being a victim of sexual or domestic violence. And there are false accusations, but they are incredibly rare. 2-ish% of reports are actually false reports. Some of those are even false under the category of unfounded, meaning there's not enough claims to back it up. That doesn't mean it wasn't true. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. So like, let's just not Like, not even, if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking like, well, false accusations and blah, 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 turn it off, because that's not what this is about. And it's important. I'm so glad you said that. Like, it creates more barriers, I think, when the celebrity is the person being accused. I mean, looking at, for me, I think the celebrity that I thought of first when thinking about this episode, and the one that was the most like shocking to my core, was Bill Cosby. Like, I grew up watching the Cosby Show. I grew up loving that show and the characters and him as, you know, as an actor, as someone in that show. So I had that initial gut reaction of like, no, it can't be true. And I think a lot of people experience that, but I think it's a process to like it's almost like the stages of grief a little bit, you know, like denial, anger, you know, whatever, and then acceptance. Like, you just find your way of learning. And obviously we're only getting some of the information, you know, from the media and stuff, which can be really hard to digest sometimes, especially depending on the person who's being accused or convicted or whatever it may be.
Sure. Yeah. I think you're so right. Like, it is hard. And it's from the space where you and I sit, right, as advocates who do this work professionally and not just are passionate about it personally. For me, it always goes a step further of like, they just believe survivors, like whoever they're accusing or whatever's happening, like, always start from there. And when I hear the side of like, oh my gosh, like, really, like with the Bill Cosby thing or Matt Lauer and all of that stuff that happened, I remember being like, what? But not, my next step is not, oh, she's lying, that didn't happen. Right. It's just like, whoa, this is wild. If, you know, if this is true, that's wild. But why would they come up with these really, you know, intense fake false stories? They just wouldn't.
Yeah. And I think that's another episode, even, we can just actually address the victim blaming attitudes and all that. But that is a huge part of this conversation, is like when celebrities, and that can be anyone, like today we wanted to talk about athletes, actors, musicians, you know, politicians, like any person that's in a position of power or a person who is well known to the public, like the names that you hear, and generally most people will know who you're talking about, that we would consider a celebrity or a famous person. But even those who are not maybe necessarily famous, like I know I don't really know a lot about the politicians, like there's a lot of representatives or senators or past representatives and senators that have been accused or found, you know, responsible or guilty for sexual misconduct and things like that. I don't really know a lot of their names, but they were in positions of power. They were, you know, like in positions where they were supposed to be looking out for their communities and for the people in their, you know, like the areas that they served, in a position of leadership. So that has an impact on, and that's why I brought up like Brett Kavanaugh. Like, I didn't know his name before, you know, what was in the news. But he's in a position of power and has been accused of something that changes your perception on his ability to, you know, act justly.
Right. Totally. 100%. I can't believe, like, I didn't think immediately of Brett Kavanaugh when we were like planning for this episode, but I'm glad that you did bring it up, because even though he was 16 or 17, like when you learn about that, and that was something like he's capable of doing, it definitely gives you pause at the very least, if not more. And I think, I don't know, I know we kind of were talking about beforehand, like the list of people that we wanted to mention, and maybe we can just kind of like, I don't know, rattle off some of those names and then just kind of go from there.
Yeah. I made a whole list of people. And this is, again, like, I'm not really a sports person. I don't follow a lot of sports. That's very clear in my lingo about it. But I wanted to include obviously some athletes. So this is kind of a mix of like musicians, athletes, people in like the in Hollywood and like the acting space and stuff like that, in addition to some politicians and like newscasters and stuff. So we have Chris Brown, Bill Cosby, Louis C.K., Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, Morgan Freeman. That was another one that hurt my heart.
I never heard that one.
Yeah, I know. And some of these I was like, I forgot about that. Or like, and some of them are also, again, on the spectrum between not all of these people have been accused of like sexual violence, rape, or domestic violence. It kind of is the spectrum of like harassment, inappropriate behavior, all the way to acts of actual, violence, domestic and sexual.
I'm thinking of the continuum of harm that you talk about in your education programs. And I think it's important to talk about it all and acknowledge it all. And that's why we're not just saying like, let's talk about the politicians, musicians, whoever that have been accused of rape. Like it all matters. It's all uncomfortable. It's all rooted in the same, power and control type deal.
Totally. So then we had James Franco, Matt Lauer, R. Kelly, Mark Schwann, who for anyone who doesn't know the name, Sydney and I are both very huge fans of One Tree Hill, which is a great show, but very problematic also. Lots of very problematic things in there. So we're not trying to just, minimize any of that. But Mark Schwann, the creator of One Tree Hill, Ed Westwick. So for anyone who's a fan of Gossip Girl, that was another one. His character commits an attempted rape and a lot of sexual harassment, and in real life him as an actor has been accused of rape. Bill O'Reilly, Woody Allen, Al Franken, Floyd Mayweather, Ray Rice, OJ Simpson, obviously everyone knows that name, Mario Batali, so famous chef, and then of course in addition we were talking about some of the politicians, kind of representatives and things like, and Al Franken was in that list, but also both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have been accused of varying behaviors of sexual misconduct by a lot of different people like coming forward. So on both sides of the aisle, on all facets of celebritydom, it is, if that's a word, fame, whatever, there are lots of people. And I also recognize that this list is particularly all men. It's not to say that there haven't been women who have been accused of this either, or people of other gender identities, but primarily what we've seen are the people who are perpetrators of this type of violence, statistically, are more often than not men. Doesn't mean that there aren't women or perpetrators or people of other identities, but also the victims are varying in gender identity. So not all the victims are female victims. A lot of them, or not a lot, but many of them are male victims too, or people of other gender identities and sexual orientation and everything else.
I was thinking of, while you were saying that, I'm going to butcher this so terribly, but there was the band TLC. Didn't one of the girls like burn down her partner's house or something like that? Like he cheated on her. This was, I'm like almost maybe before I was born. Like, I don't really know, but not before I was born, but I was probably and I think that my mom told me that, like her partner cheated on her and she like set fire to his home.
Wow, I haven't heard that.
I want to Google it. Yeah, so she is, when you were saying like the list obviously is male, or dominantly male, like that's one that I do know of, and I think it's a thing. I don't think it was a song that they wrote. Like I think it actually.
You're not like making it up. I know.
No, I don't think so.
It's hard because there's so many people, and it's like, and we were talking in preparation for this episode, my partner is like a big movie buff, so I was texting him like, who are the big names that you can think of, and especially like he's into sports, so I was like, who are some athletes and things. And I mean, there's athletes in every single sport, like baseball, hockey, football, like there's every single sport there is someone who's been accused of domestic violence, sexual assault, some who have been arrested for it, some who have been convicted for it, some who are just, their names are brought forward. So I think it's hard because the next part of the conversation becomes, how do you manage that? How do you deal with that news if you're a fan of this person? Like, I think particularly for music, like I used to be a huge Chris Brown fan, and then that changed. But it's interesting because the friend I was talking to last week was saying, like, I said something how I can't watch any Kevin Spacey movies anymore. And he was like, but he's such a talented actor. You can't look past that. And I was like, no, I can't personally. I think there has to be, no, not has to be. there can be a way for individuals, in my opinion, to recognize the art or the talent and not diminish the impact of that art or talent, while also holding that person accountable and making your own personal choice of what that looks like for you. Like, I personally cannot listen to Chris Brown. I personally cannot watch movies, you know, with Kevin Spacey or whatever it may be. But that's just my choice because I can't separate the artist and the act that they committed. But some people may be able to do that. They may be able to watch a movie, you know, produced or by like the Harvey Weinstein Company or whatever, you know, or was involved with the Harvey Weinstein Company. They may be able to watch that and not even think twice about it. But I think there's, my message to my friend too was like, it's not really up to us to decide what, you know, like how seriously or not to take it. It's up to the survivors and the victims of those you know, those people. Because maybe the victim of Louis C.K. or whoever came forward and said, I forgive them. You know, I'm in a place of moving on with my life or whatever. Like, we can follow their lead, but it's not up to us to decide for someone else, well, that wasn't that bad, or what, that wasn't so serious. Like, that's not our decision to make, if that makes sense.
Right, because that could change whatever it was, whether it was sexual harassment or rape or physical domestic violence or emotional abuse. Like, it could have changed that survivor's whole world and the way that they kind of stand in their world. So you're right, like, we can't be the one that says, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. But I do like what you were saying about, if you can separate it and you can watch the Kevin Spacey movie or listen to the Michael Jackson song or whatever it might be, still acknowledging and recognizing that was a thing that happened. In terms of holding the person accountable, it goes back to cancel culture. It goes back to the episode we released a couple weeks ago about like how to watch movies or something like that, like as a survivor and what that conversation looks like.
Yeah.
And I've had conversations with people too about like, can't we just acknowledge the art that, like, whether it's the song or the movie or the art piece or whatever that they've produced. And maybe it's a little different for politicians. I don't know, maybe that's a whole nother conversation.
Well, yeah, because they're in positions of power where it's directly impacting constituents or like citizens.
Right, they're not
laws, like if they're helping to create or pass laws that are impacting people's lives. That's a little different than like this art that I'm connecting to. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, so I think that's a piece too. And I think we don't know the right answer. We're not, you know, who are you and I to tell everyone that this is what should happen. But I do think holding people accountable and recognizing like they did a not great thing. Like, if you're going to listen to Chris Brown's music, you know, recognizing that what he did was wrong is also maybe a piece of it. And then moving from there, I don't know. But I also Googled it, and it's Lisa Lopes. Lisa Lopes turned herself into the police on June 10th, 1994, the day after a fire at NFL star Andre Rison's mansion heavily damaged the $1 million structure.
Wow. Yeah, I'm glad you looked that up too, because I think it is important. Like, I'm by no means with that list we're trying to say that like only men perpetrate, you know, sexual or domestic violence, and but it is important to also like listen to survivors, like listen to them. Like, I think about the R. Kelly docuseries that came out, you know, Surviving R. Kelly, and like how powerful, and the documentary, I know Larry Nassar, the name now is famous, but previous to being, you know, found responsible and guilty for all the sexual misconduct that he had done, I didn't know that name. I think most people probably didn't know that name. A lot of people know that name now because of the accusations and what came forward. But R. Kelly was a big name long before he was accused of the things that he's been accused of. But I think it's important too for people, particularly for the people who are like defensive about like, no, I'm a huge fan. And like, you know, I talk to my partner all the time with his NFL fantasy draft, and I'm like, you can't, even for your fantasy draft, don't draft anybody who's been accused or found guilty of like domestic and sexual violence. And he's like, I'll try, but like, there's a lot. And that's kind of wild too, when you think about like, these people still have their livelihoods and their jobs and careers and are still making a ton of money and doing what they've been doing, even after the crimes they have committed or been accused of committing. that plays a huge role in how we as fans might respond as well.
100%. Step to that too is, do they hold themselves accountable? You know, have they come forward and said, I did this really terrible thing when I was 17 years old and I'm sorry and I've taken steps to change it.
Yeah.
Or they, you know, those accusations are ridiculous and they're stupid and they're not true and whatever, you know. I think, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, because I definitely don't have like the full knowledge, but with the whole Aziz Ansari thing, like I think he made a statement about like, if she took it that way, I'm so sorry and I didn't mean, you know, I didn't mean that. And like obviously there's dynamics of that too that we could get into and talk about forever. Right. But I think the way that somebody responds to that is telling of their character and like really what, or how they've grown, if it was 20 years ago or if it was yesterday or whatever. I think, you know, just taking it seriously that someone was brave enough to come forward and say, you crossed my boundary in this kind of a way and I'm not okay with it. And responding to it and taking it seriously and treating that person with respect. Like, especially if the perpetrator is going to do that, we as fans or as, you know, citizens should hold them accountable too.
Yeah, I'm so happy you said that, because that is such an important piece to it too, of the like cancel culture response is like, we have to also give people an opportunity depending on the severity of their crimes too. Like Harvey Weinstein, Larry Nassar, yes, hold yourself accountable, but also like actually be held accountable. Like that's just, you know,
like please go to prison.
But yeah, but like for particularly for people and maybe even for behaviors that they had done years ago that they may not have known, like, oh, I didn't realize I crossed a boundary, or, you know, I was, you know, I made a wrong choice there. You know, like there is an opportunity for people to be able to take responsibility for their own actions. And you can, it's so true. I love what you said about it. Like, it says a lot about their character. Like if they're going to respond with like, these are totally false and they're lying and, you know, I would never do that. Like, okay, we get it. You're defending your character, but also like own it. Like, you know, if it's something that someone is coming forward about, like, if someone came forward to me of like, oh, well, in middle school, you bullied me, my initial gut reaction would be like, oh my God, I would never bully someone up. But I would respond with like, I'm so sorry that, you know, you felt that way. I'm sorry that happened, you know, like, and I'm not that person anymore. So I'm going to move forward in my life being extra conscious of like kindness and what respect and empathy. So it's like, yeah, give people an opportunity to like hold themselves accountable and responsible. And we also do that, you know, to hold people accountable and move forward, you know. And I think that's part of the danger of cancel culture is like, there might be that missed opportunity to let someone learn and grow and do better in the future.
Totally. No, I completely agree with you. And I think, you know, as just people like listening to music or watching movies or, you know, observing politicians behave in certain ways or whatever it might be, like the most we can do is hold people accountable and call it out when we see it. And I think we've come back to this message at the end of a last couple of our episodes, like talking about it with your friends, having those conversations that you were talking about that you had last week with your friend, and just like helping to like inform people. Like if you know that something feels weird, like it's safe to talk with someone about like, how do you react when you hear Chris Brown on the radio? I change it right away, but maybe somebody else, you know, listens to it, but also acknowledges what was wrong. And like, we safely have that conversation, and I don't have to point fingers and say, well, you're the worst person in the world for leaving his music on. Like, there's ways to learn and grow as advocates or allies too. And I think that's a cool way to kind of figure out where to take this information after we've kind of, you know, maybe dented a lot of names for people. So I apologize.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think my final thought about it too is like, educate yourself on the things that people have been accused of. Like if your gut reaction is to say that can't be true, that can't be possible, like kind of what I was saying before of like listening to survivors, like watch the documentaries, like listen to the stories being shared. And also know the facts. And this kind of brings back to the first thing I was saying of like, false accusations are not common. Like, know that this is a fact, that it's not common at all. Like 2 to 9% of the time, are people actually coming forward with false reports? And a lot of those are not false because they're lying, but unfounded without the evidence to back it up, which we know is really common. So like, educate yourself on the issues, educate yourself on the things that people are coming forward with, so that you can actually have an informed conversation about it, rather than just like I'm a fan of this person, so I won't acknowledge or believe that they did this kind of behavior. Which it can be hard. And this is not by any means to like say you should cut everyone out of your life that you like, celebrity, you know, that has ever been accused of something. But just being able to figure out how to digest it, how to talk about it with your friends or family or your peers, or like when you're watching a movie, if you notice that an actor comes out and you're like, oh, that person was accused of something. If you're a fan of Gossip Girl and you're like, oh, like, you know, just have those conversations, have that moment of recognition, because every time you're doing that, you're standing up for survivors, they are so often silenced and shamed and discouraged from coming forward. So the more we can stand up for them, even in a space where you don't know who's listening, the better.
That just gave me chills. I think that's the perfect way to end the conversation. You know, and I think too that maybe other names popped into your head while you were listening to this episode, or maybe even after. Share it with us. You know, we love to kind of hear what else is going on and what maybe we're not privy to, or we haven't learned about because we don't watch a certain show or listen to a certain type of music, or who knows. But like, as always, if you have thoughts, questions, or reactions to what we discussed today, or if you would like to connect with us for any reason, you can reach us via email or phone. Remember that these episodes are all recorded and will be available to view on IGTV, YouTube, and our main Women's Center Facebook. And please share with your friends and stay tuned for next week's episode.
Yay! Thanks for listening. Bye.